At Alcon, we believe diversity drives innovation, creativity. We need different thoughts. We don't want any of our meetings to look the same and sound the same. So we do focus on diversity. One of the partnerships that's been very near and dear to our hearts has been our OWL partnership, the ophthalmic world leaders who focus on diversity and leadership and mentorship. If you're on that ophthalmology and optometry side, which many of you in the media are, you know OWL well. OWL is not as well known on the optometry side, but they're making their inroads this year, and Alcon is right by their side in doing this. So I want to welcome Nivine Woods. Nivine's a close friend of ours. We worked with her at Alcon for a number of years before she took some different roles in the industry. So we welcome Nivine back, who is our incoming president of the OWL organization. For the past several years, since 2021, Alcon and OWL have partnered on an Eyes on Inclusion series. That series has partnered with the Alcon Open Network. Our Open Network is an employee resource group that focuses on our LGBTQ plus employees. We have others who are not involved in that group that support the group, who are allies. It's actually an organization that's really flourishing at Alcon. They have partnered with OWL, and every June, as part of Pride Month, we bring out an Eyes on Inclusion series. That series allows a platform to discuss issues within the group and allows us to educate all of us and make us more aware. So this year, one of our marquee events is this event. We're going to be talking to an OD panelist group who've been so kind to give their time this morning to us. Nivine is going to be leading that discussion with them. Nivine, if you would come on up. I know you've got some things you want to talk about with OWL before you get started.
Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Nivine Woods and I am the President-elect for OWL. As many of you know, one of OWL's key goals for 2023 was to expand our presence into optometry. For the past 20 plus years, we've been quite successful in establishing a meaningful presence and impactful collaborations, good name recognition, a solid footprint for OWL in the ophthalmology space. And I am now thrilled to announce that we are about to embark on a new initiative, which we are fondly calling Bridging the O's, expanding OWL's mission and vision into the optometry space, and hopefully in a meaningful and equally impactful way as we've done in ophthalmology. As we started talking to different leaders and organizations in optometry about OWL and about this initiative, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of energy, and it also became very clear that there is a need and a gap that OWL can help bridge. So this is one of the top priorities for the organization next year, and for me personally as I move into the president's role at the end of the year. Just this past week in Washington, D.C. at the American Optometric Association, I had the pleasure of moderating a panel discussion which was sponsored by Alcon. My guests were 4 amazing optometrists, and our topic was mentorship in the LGBTQ community. We are about to play a recording for you of that panel discussion. My guests were Dr. Jeff Walline, Dr. Lauren Haverly, Dr. Bryce St. Clair, and Dr. Rachel Gorgy. So I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel this morning. We have Dr. Jeff Walline, who is the Associate Dean for Research, the Ohio State University College of Optometry, and Jeff is also the incoming president of the Academy of Optometry. Dr. Lauren Haverly, she's an independent optometrist and the owner of Prism Eye Care in St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Bryce St. Clair is an instructor in the Department of Ophthalmology at Wilmer Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And last but not least, Dr. Rachel Gorgy, who's a resident at the Baltimore VA. welcome. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to this discussion that's going to be all about the beauty of diversity that makes our world so wonderful. And the role today, we're going to focus particularly on the role that mentors play to help individuals reach their potential. So we have a group of great panelists who are going to share their unique insights, and I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. And let's get started. So Rachel, Lauren, Bryce, Jeff, thank you for joining the discussion again, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. Just to get started, I'd like to ask each of you to share why you're interested in this conversation and what role mentors played in your journey, and maybe an advice or so that somebody gave you when you were starting. I'll start with you, Jeff.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank you, Nivine, thank you, Al, and thank you, Alcon, for the opportunity for us to be able to speak about this. It isn't often that we get the opportunity to speak about diversity, especially in regards to LGBTQ IA+ issues, so we really appreciate the opportunity. But I already forgot what all the questions were.
Mentors, what role did mentors play?
Mentors are very strong and very important in all of our aspects, and I've had lots of opportunities for formal mentorship, but I think it's really the informal mentorship opportunities that have been the most influential for me. And what I've kind of learned from some of my mentors is you play different roles. So, for example, are you a gay optometrist or are you an optometrist who's gay? I think they're two very different things, and sometimes I play one role, sometimes I play another role. And that's, I think, one of the things that I've learned through mentorship and has brought me to where I'm at today.
Lauren?
Well, obviously, you can't get anywhere without mentors, and I'm just so grateful for everyone that has done that for me. So I've had many mentors in my life. I've only had one openly gay mentor in my life, at least until recently, and he's sitting next to me. So Dr. Walline was my professor at Ohio State College of Optometry, and I remember, so I was only out for 2 years before I went into optometry school, and I left Minnesota, didn't know anyone in Ohio, and I remember thinking, how is this gonna go? How is Ohio? And of course I'm thinking I'm gonna go to school in a barn. Not really. And everyone thinks that I grew up in a tundra, which, true. But the first week was welcome week, just getting to know your classmates and going through the whole, this is what you do. And I remember Dr. Walline stood up and he said, my name is Dr. Walline, I teach context, you probably have a better title than that. And, and I'm a gay man. And I remember I just kind of sat up in my chair, I was like, great. And so I went from feeling like an outsider to knowing that I had a home. So I don't know if I ever told you that, but I loved you just being brave and saying that because it really helped me get more comfortable in my skin too.
Thank you. Bryce?
For me, I think it was, I feel like I didn't grow up with a mentor who I felt like I self-identified with. And so on the flip side, I've tried to be that role for people that I know. So when I did residency at University of Houston and at Ohio State, and then also currently in my actual current role with pre-optometry students, pre-med students, I'm very transparent about who I am because I want someone to be like, oh, there's a place for me up there. Like this person represents who I am, and I feel like the person is an innovator, or this person is an academic or whatnot. So I love that. I didn't know about Jeff Walline when I was at Ohio State. I was just myself. I was too busy being at Ohio State having fun that I didn't know. But now I've tried to create that environment, hopefully, because I recruited Rachel. So I've hopefully tried to make that happen for others.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel. So mentorship started, I guess, was mostly allies in my experience. It started actually before school, so I worked at a LASIK place, and the doctor there kind of geared me towards which school I should attend. So I grew up in New York, and then I went to school in Boston at NECO. And so at NECO, I actually was in a community health center I was at a community health center in a primarily Cape Verdean neighborhood, and one of the doctors I worked with was just very public health oriented. She was also of Vietnamese background, and she learned a lot of Cape Verdean and Spanish and got through a lot of her exams in a lot of different languages. So I thought, just like being first generation immigrant and seeing how she interacted with patients was really pivotal for me. And then also, like, she sometimes would drive me home, and and so we grew a relationship there, and I'm really grateful for that relationship, and we shared a lot about our lives
Awesome.
together.
So Rachel, as an Arab woman, which I can
Yeah.
certainly identify with myself, is there anything that you learned about yourself or the eye care community as you became your authentic self?
Well, I do think that representation is really important in eye care. Going to school in Boston, I do think that, I had a lot of access to a big city, a lot of access to, inclusion and acceptance in general. But I know a lot of people don't really have that privilege sometimes. And as an Arab specifically, I do think that sometimes being like out is not really centered in the conversation as much. And so a lot of my Arab friends who are like me, tend to maybe not include that as a big part of their personalities or present it to everybody. And I think that's a smart choice, because sometimes you need to feel safe to do that.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the common challenges that you perhaps faced, any of you, as you were seeking mentors? I mean, you talked about the amazing mentors you have. Any challenges that you faced at different stages?
I would just say, I think you heard us all say that as LGBTQIA plus people, there are no mentors out there. There are very few mentors out there. And so if that's the part of your identity that you want to find a mentor for, it's very difficult to find. So that's why I think this opportunity is so important, so we can hopefully show other people that we are there to serve as those mentors, as Bryce is doing.
And how can industry, how can Alcon, how can OWL help drive the conversation to being your authentic self?
Oh, actually, before we move on, also I think like just community in general is really helpful. So like some of the clubs at my school, like PRISM, and then there was also an inclusion club for like dealing with diversity. Those were really pivotal in like making a lot of students on campus feel accepted. And then also, I think people who are in minority groups tend to like veer towards having imposter syndrome in a lot of places. And so it was definitely helpful to build community and also to have access to mental health care. So I just wanted to add that in.
Oh, good.
You go.
I'm gonna say, I think that having this discussion, like how can Alcon help? These discussions are great. Having conversations candidly is obviously very beneficial. When I graduated from Ohio State, a group called NOSA, National Optometric Student Association, invited me back for a conversation. I was kind of talking about the intersectionality between it was called the crossroads of queer communities and eye care. There were things that I think are important things to know that I knew growing up with my identity that I feel like I researched and I knew that others didn't. So for example, I went to school in Ohio, so people who are not from Ohio think like Amish country farmland.
Barn.
Yeah, Columbus is like the 14th largest city in the nation. We have like diverse populations, huge metropolitan area. And so I thought people realize that. So when they're applying to optometry school, I think a lot of times they're thinking like, I want to go to New York City or like San Francisco or Los Angeles, but we need that everywhere. And so one thing I wish that Alcon and other people would do, and I'm currently working on this endeavor, is like promoting these conversations, but also scholarships to bring people who are diverse into the optometry school sector, because I can't tell you how many people I know who are like, who I've met in the queer community and optometry groups who are like, I chose SUNY because I knew I could be myself in New York City and Manhattan. And that hurts because like Ohio State was great. It was very loving, very accepting. Like I think it was a diverse student population, but it could always use more. And I feel like it's a disservice for people who may grow up in rural Ohio or rural Indiana or rural Missouri, if they live their entire lives and I'm the first and only person they ever interact with, or if they meet nobody who's queer and they don't know what the AIDS crisis was, they don't understand that you can't just get HIV from touching somebody's arm, and they don't know what Truvada is and what pre-exposure prophylaxis is, they need to have those understandings. Like when I did this conversation with NOSA, I was like, do you know, like during the height of the AIDS epidemic, like the entire city of Portland died. And people were like, no, like that's the population of who died from AIDS. And that like shouldn't be forgotten. People should know that, not just queer people, but like straight people should know that. And so I just think that like, again, Alcon fostering these conversations, like having these candid discussions, destigmatizing things, and then like ask questions, learn. I do that all the time where, you know, I might not know something and I'm like, hey, what's this going on with this patient base? It doesn't hurt to learn more. Kindness costs you nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really hard to follow, but I guess for me recently, I have a private practice in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I have always dreamt of just flying a pride flag outside of my clinic, and it has just felt really nice to do that. And last Monday, I realized that over the weekend, someone had cut my pride flag down, and that really upset me. So, in light of that, in light of some of the issues with Pride merchandise at Target or Starbucks not allowing their stores to show Pride is just really disappointing to me. So I remember when I first started seeing corporations have Pride stuff, I was like, they just want to profit. Like, they know that they're going to get our money. And I'd kind of like poo-poo it. And now it's so much more important than that. And so I'm so grateful to Alcon to give us this platform to talk about it, because we're here and we're not going to go away. But I feel like there's been this rise of hate against us. So thanks to Alcon.
I agree, and I've seen the blowback. You know, I'm from rural America, and I was just back visiting family, and so I've seen the blowback that Bud Light's gotten from this.
Right.
And there's no winning way to go about it for Bud Light from this point forward. But I don't think they should ever apologize. I don't think that they should discontinue what they've been doing. I think they need to move forward because we've got to create the conversation. And so I hope that that's what we continue to do, is create the conversation in some way. Even though there may be struggles associated with it, the struggles are what move us forward.
Yeah.
So Rachel and Bryce, you shared with me that you're both advocating for scholarships as well.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure.
I can talk, yeah. Go for it.
So I do think that to increase representation in any kind of industry field, or even just getting people into optometry school, I do think that there could be like a lot more opportunities given through grants, scholarships, and internships that are paid, because a lot of my friends who are also minority, who are also part of my community, sometimes had to work throughout school as opposed to building their resume. And so, any opportunities provided could be very, very beneficial. Sorry.
So I only can speak from like the lens I'm looking through, and that is that, again, I want to attract people to go to the school they want, the school that they may be drawn to because they can afford it or because they're enticed to go there, and again, to create that diverse atmosphere. I think that if you don't, I engaged with some of my classmates at Ohio State, and I guess they didn't know how to interact with different people. For example, I understand how to interact with people who are transgender or non-binary, and to me it's a non-issue, but having someone be like, well, there was a 34-year-old male who came to clinic with, and I'm like, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's like debug this kind of conversation. And so I think that's important to have these scholarships to attract queer youth into optometry, optometric medicine. One, to diversify the student body, but also to allow these soon-to-be doctors to to pull aside their colleague and say, what's going on here? Help me understand this. I can't tell you how many times I did that with some of my other classmates, where I had a friend, two of my best friends were East Asian, And I would be like, why is this so important? Or why is this always being brought up? Why can't I ever do this? And they'd say, oh yeah, this is part of the culture. We don't do this. We really can't engage in this. And it was nice to have that conversation. And if those students weren't there because they weren't champions of diversity at OSU, then I would never have had those conversations. So anyway, I think scholarships are a great way to entice people to validate that they went through maybe a struggle that others didn't exist with. You can look up the stats yourself, but a huge portion of queer individuals deal with like depression and suicidal ideation. I grew up in rural Alabama where I'd never met anyone else who was gay until I was 18 years old. And there were slurs and commercials and people saying stuff all the time growing up. And I felt like something was wrong. I was defective, like something was wrong with me. And so again, validating that like, hey, here's $4,000 or here's $2,000 to go to Ohio State. We acknowledge that it took a lot for you to be alive here. And I think that's extremely beneficial. So it's the least someone could do, I think, to kind of give validation to your life journey.
Thank you. So my organization, OWL, prides itself in promoting diversity. To me, it's inclusion. We advocate for diversity because there's been a long history of exclusion. So Jeff, what role do you believe diversity plays in leadership? I'd love for you to share your perspective. I know it's a very near and dear topic to you.
I think it goes beyond inclusion, and there's a science behind diversity and what it can ultimately do, and especially when it comes to the science of science, I know that particular area well. And it shows that the more diverse thought that you have, the more innovation you ultimately have. And so if we can bring a wider voice to optometry, and it doesn't have to be LGBTQIA+, there's lots of different areas where diversity are important, then I really think we can innovate and move our profession forward in a much better way.
What advice do you have for anyone wanting to find a mentor who champions an inclusive culture and diversity?
I would just say, we're everywhere. And I think that the hardest challenge is just showing up. And that's literally in everything in life is 80%. If you're there, if you show that you're making an effort, people will want to help you. There are, especially here at Optometry's meeting, at Academy, there are individuals that have been spending their entire life's work at promoting and improving optometry. Optometry looks so much different than it did even in the 80s or the 90s. And that was intentional. So if we show up and we show someone who has been doing this for 30 years that we're interested in growing the profession, I think that they're gonna extend you an arm, just like what you have done to me and what others have done. So really sincerely, just show up. Even if you're uncomfortable, just start making the conversation, just ask people about them, and eventually you're gonna find your mentor and you're gonna find yourself in positions that you never would have dreamed of. And I would also say too, on the leadership aspect, so I'm also president of my state association, of Minnesota Optometric Association, and if we're not present at the table, then we don't have a chance to change the narrative. So it's not necessarily easy to be a leader that's an openly gay optometrist. People are sometimes, I understand not everyone's gonna agree with me. That's okay. I also think blue cheese is terrible. So
I agree with that.
Thank you. That is way better. But I think what would happen if I weren't there? Because that's 10 times worse than having to go through some conversations. And so I'm just grateful to have that opportunity to have a seat at the table.
Any other challenges that you or Jeff faced as you were holding leadership positions in optometry or in the industry in general? Anything else you want to share? Because I know both of you have very prominent positions.
I would say that I've been lucky in that I'm in a situation where I can be who I am and without regard to issues related to that. I would also say that there are certain places in optometry where I wouldn't be who I am naturally. I hide a little bit who I am. And, all we can do is try to slowly break through some of that. And it's by being part of the conversation. I completely agree with what Lauren said. If we're not there, there's no way we're gonna have a role or a place in optometry.
You said other challenges of leadership. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, I would just say even oftentimes, by the way, I learned yesterday that I'm straight passing and I didn't know that. So I was hanging out with my state association and I was like, well, yeah, you could tell I'm gay. And they're like, no, you can't. And I was like, oh. So oftentimes people always come up to me and they're like, oh, so what does your husband do? And it depends if I want to take the extra 5 minutes to tell them about it. And so sometimes I just say architecture and move on because I want them to look at me as the president of the MOA, not the lesbian president of the MOA, which, I mean, I am and I'm proud of it, but there's so much more to me. And other times, yeah, I guess I just, when people say, what does your spouse do? I immediately feel so much more comfortable and I go, yeah, my wife, she's in architecture. And I know that they're an ally. So using gender neutral pronouns is really, really great when you have no idea who you're talking to.
I'm gonna build off of that. I think people, I mean, I have the misconception, I think, or people have the misconception that you have to do these giant leaps and bounds to be like a queer ally or an ally of some sort. You don't, you literally don't. So for example, someone asked me, I was on another panel and they were like, oh, what can I do in my practice? And I was like, something as simple as like pronouns. I know it's like a big hot button issue. Hear me out. In my department, our chief of our surgery is a corneal surgeon. His name is Ashley. It's a family name, Ash. So we like pronouns anyway because everyone's like, oh, hey, Mrs. So-and-so or Dr. So-and-so. And he's like, it's Ash. I'm a guy, by the way. We have a technician. Her name is Mikey. It's like Mikhaila or whatever. It's Russian or whatever. She goes by Mikey. So it's like, and especially if names you're not familiar with culture-wise, like if I don't know, like example, a Chinese name like Li Yun or like a Korean name Li Yun, I don't know if that's a male or female name. I don't know if it's a non-binary name. I don't know. So having something as simple as like pronouns on your form, day made. Dividing your optical shop up by brands instead of by gender, like the men shop here, the women shop here. It's like, this is Oakley, this is, Alcon, or these are Alcon contact, or that's a bad example, you don't do glasses. Marchand frames up here, like, whatever it is, like, it's simple to do. It's like, oh, you like those frames? Great, try now. We're not gendering our glasses, we're not lifting up, whatever, and trying to say like, oh, men or women wear this one. I think another common thing you can do is gender neutral language. I say spouse all the time, regardless. What does your partner do? All the time, regardless. So easy, so easy. And I think it makes people feel a lot safer. So that was something that's super simple. And like, what does your spouse do? Even if I know they had mentioned like their wife, I might forget. I'm like, what does your spouse do again? I don't care. Like, it's like, keep the conversation going. It does not take an overhaul, wave your pride flag, having a, it's nice, but you don't need to have that happen in order to show solidarity.
Yeah.
Rachel, anything you want to add about the role that allies can play, people who are not part of the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Bryce touched on, like with the pronouns, but also earlier you mentioned like just kind of informing yourself on a lot of issues. And so like, just like with the HIV epidemic, there's still an epidemic today with monkeypox. And that, I know it seems a little bit of a stretch for eye care professionals to be like, advocating for everything, but it's the vaccine rollout for that compared to the vaccine rollout for COVID was very different. And so just informing yourself on public health issues and how you can kind of spread these messages to everybody, because it's a big ecosystem. Everybody interacts with everybody. And, these are just public health announcements, I guess.
I also, just one more thing, I have a frame rep that he, when I told him that my wife is a home brewer, he was like, oh, wow, cool. So the next time he brought his frames over, he brought some beer, not for me, for my wife, to try. He's like, have her try. Like, let me know what she thinks. And just something as simple as that was just like, great, cool, you're okay with my wife, okay. Like, very easy.
So in many ways, the community has changed over the years, and I know some say it hasn't changed enough over the years. Can you share any advice that you would give your younger self when you were just starting or getting started in your career? I'll start with all of you.
I can't remember my younger
Oh, you can't. It's been so long.
You couldn't remember the question either, you knew. I would just say one of the biggest things, and I learned it from actually my best friend in Minnesota, is if you are confident when you talk about your spouse or your partner, then other people will feel more comfortable. If you're, and I understand that that's a journey to get there. It definitely was a journey for me. But when you talk about it, as long as you're confident with yourself, and this is literally anything in life, then people are like, oh, okay, at ease. And also, come out on your own terms. If you're not ready to do it, that's okay. It's your time, it's your life. And eventually you're gonna get there, but find the people that will support you and lift you up, and eventually you will feel comfortable. But don't feel this pressure just because we're up here, we're okay talking about it. That doesn't have to be you yet, but find your people and eventually you'll get there.
I would probably say baby steps, but you build momentum with every step, right? So I remember when I came out in high school, I wanted to come up to my parents when I was in high school because I didn't want them to think that college changed me, right? Like the higher education world made me different. And I was like, no, like, anyway, that's a whole other story. I was like, no, remember my 5th birthday party, like Cinderella? Anyway, so I was like, it's been like that. So, but I want to make sure, and my mom, I remember being like, please, don't bring a family photo of you and your spouse and kids to your office when you have an office. It's only going to cause vitriol with your patients. It's only going to cause awkward moments. You don't know which, like, as if it's like some sort of politics. Like, make sure you don't lose a patient. I remember sitting there internalizing that when I was 18 and being like, wow, I really shouldn't. And then the more I like start thinking about it, the more leaderships I've taken on, I'm like, I need to. There could be a kid, like a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old patient who's like, I can't find a doctor who is like me. I can't find anyone who's like me. And then be like, wow, that guy is, I mean, I'm not married, single, by the way. Like, that guy's married, or that guy has like a kid. It's like, and I think that that's extremely important. I would have never thought in a million years I'd be comfortable with having my spouse on my like front desk of my office. But now I definitely am going to do that because I think it's extremely important and it gets easier. I would never thought I'd be in a panel discussion about that if I was 18. In rural Alabama, I wouldn't. And then, you know, it's easier every time you deflate or take away the stigma associated with it, I guess.
Not stigmatism.
Not stigmatism. Yeah. Other stigma. That's still pretty for stigmatism.
I guess I'd just tell my younger self to just be a little bit more honest with more people around you and try to find your people a little sooner. But also, you know, we all touched on that, so that's it, really.
I also want to say that, like, you don't have to sacrifice any aspect of yourself because this identity, which I think all of us have kind of talked about. I think that there are some people who capitalize on this one part of their identity for anything. But for example, like, I was born and raised in Alabama. Like, I'm a Christian man, and I go to church, and I go to a very queer, friendly, affirming church. And people are always like jaw dropped. They're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that's who I am. I feel like you don't have to sacrifice any part of you could be a queer optometrist. You could be, you know, like a mom. It's another identity. It's not my sole identity. And I wanted to make sure, at least when I was going through practice, that I'm seen as a professional, an educator, and an academic before that. But I'm not going to shirk that or hide it under the rug by any stretch of the imagination. But you don't have to sacrifice anything. It's your life. You make it. You can compromise and be everything you want to be. That's important.
Yeah.
Lauren, you talked a bit with me about how your office has become a very open, friendly, welcoming place for non-binary people, for all sorts of people. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you built that?
So I didn't build it. I just decided that if you want an eye exam, I'll be respectful to you. I don't care how you identify. So actually, a mom drove her trans son an hour to my office. And the reason how I found this out was I looked, of course, I was like, oh, wow, that city is an hour away. And so I was like, how'd you hear of us? And the mom was like, well, did you know that you're on Reddit? First off, I don't have Reddit, but it seems super cool. Wow. And there's like threads of trans-friendly clinics and areas for people where they can go. And my mom was like, you know, my son just came out as trans, like, I want to make sure he's comfortable, and that blew me away. Yeah, so it actually gets me really emotional to think about that, so that a mom is willing to drive 1 hour that way, 1 hour back, just so her son can have a 30-minute eye exam. So I also when I interview potential employees, I'm like, so I just want to let you know, like, I'm a lesbian. If that's a problem, you may or may not want to work here, and I'm just upfront about that because, quite frankly, and I'm okay, and I'm sure there are some people that don't want to. I'm okay with that. But if you are going to work at my clinic, then we need to be on the same page with that, because people do now know in Minnesota that Prism Eye Care is a safe space. So, by the way, I did name my clinic Prism Eye Care, and I didn't know that there was a queer optometry student club called Prism. That's great.
You know, like
and so,
rainbow.
yeah. And so I was like, I'm gonna have bat signals everywhere. So I have like Pink Floyd Prism everywhere, and they're like, oh, it's a great band. I'm like, yeah, it is.
Mind if I just provide one
questions?
cautionary tale?
Yes, please.
So we talked about, depending on how comfortable you are, you can come out in this and that. But so I'm out and proud and have absolutely no problem saying that. But my partner, who is a church musician, literally, probably last week, had to sign a contract that said he will abide by the church's lifestyle, which means that he can't be gay. And if literally one person found out he was gay and decided that that was opposed to their lifestyle or whatever, he could be fired in an instant. So bigotry exists. I mean, I think we are in a much more progressive time than we were just 10 years ago, but we still got a long way to go. And it not only exists, but it's justified. I mean, he has no recourse. If he is fired, he has absolutely no recourse that he can do. And so it's really weird because I'm out and proud, he is not. And so it's a real struggle in our household sometimes of how we can behave. You won't find him on my social media platform, except for maybe if I say my friend or something like that, but not even then. And so it's all this bigotry still exists, and we got to keep that in mind, and that's why we have to have these conversations and why we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this, because we've got a long way to go still.
I also want to piggyback off of what Lauren had mentioned. So when I went to Hopkins and I first got my MPI and all this kind of stuff, accreditation, I went onto the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and I switched myself to like a queer-friendly, trans-friendly provider. I also joined what's called OutCare. OutCare connects you with other like queer providers or queer-friendly providers for anything, mental health, dentistry, optometry, whatever. It's very similar to, I think, the Black eye care perspective. I'm not a member of the Black community, but I know there are people who are like, I want someone who understands what it was like, or in my family, the cultural, and I get that. That's, again, why we need, you want someone who understands what you're going through or understands what you went through. And so I have a very similar thing. I think about my patient base. I work at Hopkins, and a lot of my patients have systemic diseases that I'm checking the ocular manifestations of in a clinic. A lot of them have HIV, some have a history of AIDS retinopathy, some of them, I mean, it could be STIs, because and that's a whole other conversation where a lot of clandestine culture developed STIs because people weren't allowed to be their authentic selves. So they had to hide themselves away, and there was unsafe practices. So they have history of all these issues, and I probably see like at least 3 patients who are on the LGBTQ spectrum a day, if not more. Sometimes like 6 or 7, and I only see like maybe 15 patients a day. And I have students who are like, there's another one. And I'm like, because they need a doctor. They need a provider. They want to be like, even if it's something like, oh, I'm a professor, my husband does blah, 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 my husband recommended you. And it's like, great, like you need to build that community. And I feel like, again, having these discussions, like Jeff had mentioned, are extremely, extremely important, and make yourself welcoming. And because we still have aberrant or abject discrimination also in other countries. It's not, countries that border us still have issues. So anyway, that's important.
Well, thank you. I'll just close by saying thank you, everyone, and thank you to Alcon for the continued support, and certainly a big shout out to Rachel. You had something that you're dying to say. Please.
I did also want to thank Alcon for the platform, and also, just thinking back to history, we're really only here during June, end of June, because of Black trans women who sacrificed a lot at Stonewall. And so just wanted to keep that in the conversation.
Well, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I think we should keep this conversation going because we all want to make our industry certainly a space where everybody can belong and where everybody can grow. Thanks again. Appreciate the time and appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your insights with us. And like someone once told me, to change the world, just be yourself.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So that concludes the end of our recording that happened last week in DC. Once again, my sincere thanks to Alcon for the sponsorship and to our distinguished panel for joining us and for sharing their stories with all of you. We will now open it for a live Q&A and we'll take your questions.
I'd now like to invite our panelists to come on camera so we can have our Q&A. And I would like to invite all of our guests, as I multitask and spotlight people, to submit your questions. And we certainly appreciate all the comments that have been coming through in chat. Thank you so much for those. There are our panelists. Let's see, we do have a few questions, which is great. The first question is, what is your most proud work professional moment that involves being an open member of the LGBTQ plus community? Who would like to take that one?
I'll start.
Thanks, Jess.
My proudest moment was in the panel discussion that you saw online there when Lauren said, how it made her feel when all I did was say that I'm a gay male. She had not told me that before, and it brought tears to my eyes. It made me quite proud, and something that I will make sure that I do every single time I introduce myself to students from now on, for sure.
Love it. Thank you. Anyone else?
So in February, I gave my presidential or my speech for my inauguration for being president of my state association, and just being able, my parents were there, my wife was there, and just being able to say and thank you to my wife was really powerful, because there were also some optometrists there that I'm sure actually didn't even know that I was a lesbian. And so that was kind of just look, I am currently trying to lead our profession in our state, and this is who I am. And I didn't think I was going to be there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I think mine would probably have to be being invited both to another panel discussion and to this one, to show that at least internally looking back, I've come a long way in my journey, and that others are starting to acknowledge that there needs to be dialogue, and I represent someone or a group of people who need to have a voice to be heard.
Lovely. Thank you.
I also had an experience when I was working at a community health center, again in Boston, and it was, I think, primarily Dominican neighborhood, but it was also very low income. And then so it was maybe like a 16, 17-year-old that started to I just had the pin on. I just had the little pin with the flag on. And they started to ask me questions about this. And then luckily in that community health center, it was really lovely to have a condensed place with mental health so readily available. So I just sent her across the hall at the end of our call, we're on a call now, at the end of our call. And then she was able to just get some resources and stuff there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next question. How do you handle homophobia in patient care? Who would like to take that one?
I've experienced it plenty. And before, I used to just kind of ignore it and just go on. But again, my best friend who taught me more of the confidence about all that, she goes, why don't you just say something as simple as, oh, we don't use that language here. And it almost kind of sounds like a parent figure to a kid, because they're being childish for doing that. And it kind of makes them feel silly. And then I do go back to their eye exam, but I don't just let them skirt that by anymore, because I think they need to hear how silly they sound when they say those things. But in the same vein, you also need to feel safe, because you are in a confined, small, dark room. And so sincerely, if you do not feel comfortable, get that eye exam over, take them off the recall, and hopefully never see them again.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll be honest, I haven't ever experienced that, but I think, one of the things I always try to prepare in advance. So I think one thing you can do, if you're out, you should prepare something. So, what I've always thought I would say if I was confronted with this issue is, I'm an excellent doctor and I really want to take care of your eyes and your vision, but that kind of language isn't tolerable in my particular practice. So if you aren't comfortable with that, then you should seek care elsewhere. And that may be a little too confrontational, but it's probably the least amount that I could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where somebody didn't want to see me, but not because they knew I was gay. It was really just because I was brown. So I was just like, great, that's one less patient for me to do.
Love it. Thank you. And the next question, students are still young and maybe hesitant to come out because they worry about their parents' reaction. Were any of your parents actually surprised when you came out?
I'll speak.
Thank you,
I
Bryce.
kind of alluded to this during the panel discussion. They have these Instagram or maybe it's like a Tumblr or whatever feeds that show like the photos of when you kind of knew or your parents should have known. There were plenty of photos of when I was younger. Like again, my 5th birthday party was Cinderella themed. It's like to a handsome prince. Like I mean, and so when I told my mom when I was 18, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." My grandmother had no idea, and I was kind of like, "Okay, great." I mean, I could have sworn everyone kind of knew, but my family was very supportive. My mom, my grandmother were my champions, and they said like, "We love you unconditionally, and we'd rather have you in our lives than not in our lives." So they weren't surprised, or they were surprised, but they still love me nonetheless, which I'm very lucky about, because a lot of families that's not the case.
Thank you.
Actually, pretty similarly, my mom used to have to like bribe me with Xena Warrior Princess to like even stay quiet in church and like sit next to her. So I'm like, how did we miss this? Is it really a surprise?
Love it. Oh, awesome.
So my mom was like, so you're really talking to your friend a lot. Is there something going on? And I was finally to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm just going to come out. And it was junior year of college over the holiday break. And I said, Mom, she's my girlfriend. And my mom was sitting there and she goes, oh. And by the way, this is inappropriate and I regret saying this, but I said, at least I'm not pregnant. And she said, we could deal with that. And I said, got it. So it was tough because that was the first day that I was home for the holiday break for the whole month. And we went through some stuff, but my mom's my best friend now. And like, we've gotten there. Oh, see, it still gets me emotional, but like, I know like my mom just had this dream for me for 20 years. And it was from left field for her. She had no idea. And I was like, she's like, Lauren, you've known this. You told me you've known this for years. Like, give me some time to process. And so like, now we're good. Now, like, first off, I think she likes my wife more than me, but it was a process for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I think for me, my coping mechanism is denial. So I think literally everybody knew before I did. But my parents were still surprised, but never had a negative moment. I am about the luckiest person who's ever come out. I think surrounded by friends who were like, it's about time. And my parents and my brother and my sister, I think they were confused because this isn't something we dealt with in my family, but they knew they loved me, and that's all that really mattered. So I was very lucky. I didn't have the same struggles that everybody else had.
Thank you so much. Next question, what creates an environment where employees feel comfortable being open about their queerness? How can employers improve this with their direct reports?
Lauren, this is you.
Well, Well, I think it's a little different because I am gay. So when I hire people, I need to make sure that we're on the same page, as I said in the panel, but also just using, and like what we said as well, gender neutral pronouns, not making assumptions about anyone, whether it's their sexual orientation or religion or anything. So, and then also when people are being vulnerable with you, like looking them in the eyes, being present, not being distracted, showing that you are sincerely listening and you care, I think goes a long way. And also being vulnerable back too, just extending that olive branch.
I know it sounds very, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. I said I'm not an employer, but I have thought about this question a little bit, mostly because I do think that if you are an employer, it might be important to consider like which insurances you'll offer your employees and making sure that those cover like gender affirming surgeries and things like that, because I think that's limited in the choices.
I was gonna say, like, I know it sounds very cliche or HR, but something as simple as codifying something as like a mission statement, or something on a website or a document lets us know that it's a safe place to be ourselves, and then holding employees accountable for their actions. I remember growing up, an experience where two gentlemen walked into a clinic, and these two women who were working, again, the deep south, who were working in the clinic, were like, those men made some terrible choices in their lives. And I was like, oh my gosh, they drive diesel instead of like, did not drive fuel efficient car. What do you mean terrible choices? But like, I mean, I had that was, homophobia being shared in the office or being expressed in the office. And it would have been really cool if like the office manager who heard that conversation was just like, hey, I know that you might not agree with that, but like this is a respectful place of the office. These are patients who are coming in to look for glasses or whatnot, and just holding, again, your staff accountable. And I think a lot has changed in the past, 15 years. So I think it's people are getting more and more like that. But HR training, right, the HR typical answer is very beneficial.
Nice.
Here's what not to do when at another place that I worked, my boss, after I told him that I was married to a woman, I think he took a week and he goes, so what should I say to staff? Just please don't do that. We're going to be able to come out on our own terms. Like let your employee that you hire say their own journey and share their own story. Like it may be a big deal to you because you're not around it as much, or maybe the staff that you already have is not around it as much, but it shouldn't need to be an announcement. It's just someone that we love. That's all.
Thank you. Another question we have is, what are your recommendations for students applying for optometry school today in regards to disclosing their LGBTQ plus status?
I honestly think that they should do as they feel comfortable with. One thing that we have to keep in mind is our world is changing rapidly, and there's Supreme Court decisions that are coming down that may make it illegal for people at institutions to talk about diversity in any way, shape, or form. Literally can't bring up any conversation related to diversity. And so there may be a time when, and it depends on how things happen in the future, but there may be a time when somebody brings up questions like that, and schools will have to respond and say, so I'm sorry, but we're not even allowed to talk about that. And as horrible as that sounds, and as backward as we seem to be moving, that's the reality. So I just think bring it up if you feel comfortable and you feel it's relevant, and do as you please.
Thank you.
I would also
Bryce?
say too, like pick a school that embraces you. Like don't just pick a school that will quote accept you in admissions. Pick a school that will accept every part of you. And yeah, I'm biased, but Ohio State has that. And I don't know about some of these other schools, but it's pretty clear in the admissions process if the school or the college values it, because they're going to bring it up. And if they bring it up, then you're good.
Yeah, I would
Although
say
they can only bring it up for now.
Yeah, true.
I would say like another thing that I mentioned previously on the panel discussion is Rachel and I had talked about scholarship programs. Again, I think that even being a member of like a queer or queer ally, group, and being demonstrative in your support is extremely beneficial. And I think it can eventually be rewarding financially for the applicant. So I would say, I agree with the advice, if you're ready, you can do it, but hopefully in the future, disclosing it won't be taboo and it will be embraced. It'll facilitate conversation and may actually help pay for part of your tuition, or at least that's the goal.
Excellent. And this will be our last question. Do you mentor any LGBTQ plus colleagues currently, and or do you have any ideas for new inclusion and professional development initiatives for LGBTQ plus colleagues in this field?
I'll start. I don't formally mentor anybody related to that, but I hope that by me being out and me having ally stickers in my office, and I hope that people feel like they can come and talk to me if they need to. And I think we're lucky in that most of the schools have some sort of affinity group related to LGBTQIA+. And so there are communities that people can find. And if you happen to be part of a bigger university, if it's not in the School of Optometry, it may be in a bigger university or in the local community.
Thank you. Anyone else on that one?
I love that Alcon and OWL put it on a national stage last week. I think that they're, especially knowing all the different states that were present and that they just made a statement, I think it was really, really, really powerful. So I applaud you guys for doing that, and to continue to do that on the national stage is very imperative. In Minnesota, it's not as big of a deal here, but I can imagine I might get kicked out if I lived in the South.
Excellent. All righty. Well, thank you, everyone. I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining us today for this important panel and recording, and thank all of our panelists for all of their great insights and all of that wonderful chatter in chat and that love and support. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. See ya.
For having
Thank
us.
you.